Ah, Greenland, land of breathtaking glaciers, majestic polar bears, and Donald J. Trump wanting to buy it. You remember that, right? It seemed bonkers, like trying to buy a timeshare in Antarctica. But Greenland isn't just some giant ice cube. It's strategically vital, resource-rich, and increasingly melty. Climate change is turning Greenland into a geopolitical hotbed. The US and China are vying for control of the Arctic. This isn't about ice fishing rights, folks. It's about control of untapped resources and potential conflict. Greenland, a vast white expanse, is about to become very relevant to your interests. It's like your freezer drawer, important but often overlooked. But hold on to your parka. Greenland sits in the Arctic Circle. Climate change is turning it into a shipping superhighway. Faster routes mean less fuel and lower costs. Whoever controls Greenland controls future global trade. Now, you might be thinking, John, isn't this a bit dramatic? It's just some shipping lanes. And to that, I say, have you met the United States? We're talking about a country that once invaded a Caribbean island because they thought it had weapons of mass destruction, which turned out to be mango trees. The point is, the US has a bit of a history when it comes to, shall we say, securing its interests. And Greenland, my friends, is in the interest crosshairs. Turns out Greenland was a prime spot for the US to keep an eye on those pesky Soviets. They even built a whole bunch of top-secret military bases there. And now, with China flexing its muscles on the world stage, that strategic importance hasn't faded, not even a little bit. It's like finding out your grandma's knitting needles are actually ancient Viking artifacts. Suddenly everyone's interested. Except instead of knitting needles, it's an island with enough potential military applications to make even the most Zen Buddhist monk reach for a missile silo. So yeah, Greenland's location, it's not just about pretty glaciers and confused seals anymore. It's about global power plays, potential conflicts, and enough tension to make a tectonic plate blush. All right, let's talk about the elephant seal in the room, or rather the rapidly melting ice sheet it's currently perched precariously on. Yes, climate change, the gift that keeps on giving, if by gift you mean existential threat to humanity. But hey, every cloud and all that, because while the planet slowly cooks, it's also opening up a treasure trove of opportunity in Greenland. See, beneath all that ice, Greenland is hiding some seriously valuable stuff. We're talking oil, natural gas, rare earth minerals, the kind that go into your smartphones, electric cars, and those vibrating fidget toys that were briefly all the rage. It's like the Earth hid its valuables under a giant ice cube, and now that the ice is melting, everyone's trying to get their hands on the loot. And who can blame them? These resources are the keys to the kingdom in the 21st century. Control the rare earth minerals, and you control the tech of the future. Control the oil and gas, and you control, well, a lot of things, including the continued existence of our planet as we know it. But hey, one crisis at a time, right? So we've got a melting island sitting on a goldmine of resources strategically located in a region that's about to become very important for global trade. What could possibly go wrong? Well, for starters, everyone and their dog wants a piece of the Greenland pie. The US, never one to miss an opportunity to assert its influence, is sniffing around like a kid in a candy store. China, with its insatiable appetite for resources and global dominance, is also eyeing Greenland with interest. And let's not forget Russia, which, let's face it, loves a good land grab. Remember Crimea? Yeah, that was fun. It's like a geopolitical game of Risk, except instead of little plastic armies, we're talking about actual armies. And instead of bragging rights, the winner gets to control a big chunk of the world's future. And in the middle of it all sits Greenland, trying to figure out who to trust, who to partner with, and how to avoid becoming the next geopolitical pawn in a game it didn't sign up for. Greenland is strategically important. Like finding out your awkward teenage diary is actually the key to time travel. Greenland isn't just strategic, it's a treasure chest buried under ice. We're talking resources, oil, natural gas, rare earth minerals, the kind that makes CEOs and countries redraw maps. Greenland has about 25% of the world's undiscovered hydrocarbons, enough to fuel a small planet. And then there are the rare earth minerals, the real MVPs, used in everything from smartphones to guided missiles. Now you might be thinking, John, why are you so worked up about a bunch of rocks? Well, dear viewer, these rocks could reshape the global balance of power. China controls 80% of rare earth mineral production. Imagine if Greenland became a major player in this market. It would be a game changer for the US and Western countries. And China? They wouldn't be too happy about it. Greenland is more than just a big chunk of ice. It's a geopolitical prize everyone wants. Now, if you thought the race for resources was tense, buckle up, because we're about to dive into the military dimension of Greenland's importance. And let me tell you, it's a real nail-biter. See, Greenland's strategic location isn't just about shipping routes and minerals. It also happens to be incredibly valuable from a military standpoint. I mean, think about it. If you're going to have a staring contest with your arch nemesis, you'd want to be standing as close as possible, right? Well, during the Cold War, Greenland was basically the eyeball of the United States, staring right into the soul of the Soviet Union. The US built a whole network of military bases and radar stations there, keeping a watchful eye on any suspicious Soviet activity. It was like a really intense game of I Spy with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. And even though the Cold War is technically over, thank God, the military importance of Greenland hasn't diminished one bit. In fact, it's arguably even more important now. Well, because the world has gotten a whole lot more complicated since the good old days of the Cold War. Back then, it was just the US and the Soviets duking it out like two heavyweight boxers. But now there are new players in the ring, and they're not afraid to throw a few punches of their own. I'm talking, of course, about China and its increasingly assertive presence on the world stage. China has been beefing up its military, building artificial islands in the South China Sea, and generally throwing its weight around like a panda on a sugar rush. And you know what's right in the middle of all this geopolitical maneuvering? You guessed it. Greenland. Its location makes it the perfect spot for monitoring Russian submarine activity in the Arctic, as well as keeping tabs on any potential Chinese shenanigans. The US has always kept an eye on Greenland, but now China is making moves. China's Belt and Road Initiative aims to connect the world through infrastructure, but China's ambitions extend to the Arctic. They aim to become a near-Arctic state with the Polar Silk Road. Now, you might be wondering, where does Greenland fit into all of this? Well, my friends, Greenland is the crown jewel of China's Arctic ambitions. Its location, right smack dab in the middle of the Arctic, makes it the perfect pit stop for ships traveling along the Polar Silk Road, and China has been wasting no time in trying to cozy up to Greenland. They've been investing in mining projects, offering to build airports and infrastructure, and generally showering Greenland with attention and promises of economic prosperity. Now, some might say that this is just China being a good global citizen, spreading the wealth around, but others, myself included, are a little more skeptical, because China has a bit of a reputation, you see, a reputation for using its economic clout to exert political influence. Now, you might be thinking, what's the worst that could happen? Oh, my sweet summer child, you think China just wants to be pen pals with a giant ice cube? No, China plays the long game, a game with more cunning twists and turns than a season of The Crown, written by M. Night Shyamalan. They call it the Belt and Road Initiative, but it's less a belt and more like one of those Chinese finger traps. Easy to get into, bloody impossible to get out of. They swoop in, offering loans for infrastructure projects, ports, roads, probably even those adorable little bridges you see in traditional Chinese gardens. Countries, giddy with the promise of modernity, sign on the dotted line. But then, surprise! The projects often come with strings attached, inflated costs, shoddy construction, and oh yeah, the small print that says your soul in perpetuity. And when those countries inevitably can't pay up, well, China's there, ready to generously accept a pound of flesh, or, a strategically important port, or controlling interest in a vital resource. Just ask Sri Lanka how that whole port for debt thing worked out for them. Spoiler alert, not great. So, where does Greenland fit into all of this? Well, let's just say its pristine, icy shores are looking awfully tempting to a country with a penchant for strategic expansion and a history of playing hardball with debtors. Remember those independence dreams Greenland's been harbouring, the ones Denmark keeps accidentally on purpose ignoring? Well, China's listening, and they're more than happy to offer a shoulder to cry on. and a few $billion to, loosen Denmark's grip a bit. Now, I'm not saying China's going to roll in and start painting the ice red. They're far more subtle than that, but a few strategically placed investments here, a little assistance with infrastructure there. Suddenly, Greenland finds itself increasingly beholden to Beijing, its economic future tied to a country that views the world like a giant game of risk. And trust me, when it comes to risk, China doesn't mess around. They're in it to win it, even if it means playing the bankruptcy of a small icy nation card. Greenland, that icy expanse yearning to breathe free, faces a dilemma older than time itself: how to leave the nest when your parents pay for your cell phone plan. Except in this case, the cell phone plan is financial stability and the parents are, well, Denmark. See, independence is great in theory. You get to pick your own bedtime, eat ice cream for dinner, declare war on Luxembourg just because you can. But it also means paying your own bills. And unfortunately, Greenland's economy isn't exactly firing on all cylinders. They're heavily reliant on Denmark for, well, pretty much everything. It's like trying to move out when your roommate also happens to be your sugar daddy. Except, in this case, the sugar daddy is more interested in preserving its fishing rights than funding your Etsy store for handcrafted ice sculptures. So, Greenland's stuck between a rock and a hard place. Stay with Denmark and remain the world's largest county, financially dependent but politically stable, or take the plunge, embrace the terrifying unknown of independence, and risk becoming the world's largest. Well, you get the idea. Enter stage left. The United States of America and China, two global heavyweights with wallets deeper than the Mariana Trench and a shared interest in cozying up to this strategically important chunk of ice. The US, with its history of, shall we say, persuasive diplomacy, sees Greenland as the ultimate Arctic fixer-upper, a diamond in the rough, albeit a diamond that's currently encased in a glacier and guarded by a very polite but firm Danish gentleman. China, on the other hand, sees Greenland as the crown jewel in its polar Silk Road, a strategic linchpin that would solidify its Arctic ambitions and give it a front-row seat to the melting and potentially lucrative Arctic playground. Caught in the middle is Greenland, forced to choose between two suitors with vastly different intentions and a shared tendency to view the world as their own personal geopolitical chessboard. It's a high-stakes game of who wants to be a reluctant superpower's best friend, and frankly, nobody's quite sure how it's going to play out. Alright, remember that time Trump wanted to buy Greenland, like it was a timeshare in Florida he saw during a golf commercial? Well, put aside the sheer absurdity of it all, the aggressive real estate haggling with the sovereign nation, and the fact that Denmark quite reasonably told him to shove it. Let's, for a moment, entertain this ridiculous hypothetical. Imagine, if you will, a world where America's borders suddenly got a whole lot bigger, a whole lot icier, and a whole lot closer to Santa Claus. Forget about 50 states, we'd be talking about 51 shades of geopolitical chaos. Suddenly, the US would control a massive chunk of the Arctic, a region rapidly becoming the world's next big battleground. We're talking shipping routes, resources, and enough strategic leverage to make even a seasoned diplomat sweat through their pantsuit. And let's not forget the sheer awkwardness of family gatherings. Thanksgiving with your Canadian cousins just got a whole lot more interesting when you've got to drive through 1,000 miles of frozen tundra to get there. Now, you might be thinking, John, why are we even talking about this? Greenland is just a giant block of ice, with some polar bears thrown in for good measure. And to that I say, you clearly haven't been paying attention to the memo on climate change. Because underneath all that melting ice, my friends, lies a treasure trove of resources. We're talking oil, natural gas, rare earth minerals. The kind that make your smartphone light up and your electric car go vroom. It's like the planet hid its emergency stash up there, and now, thanks to global warming, it's up for grabs. And who better to grab it, some might argue, than the good old US of A. We've got a long and storied history of, shall we say, liberating resources from other parts of the world. Why should the Arctic be any different? But here's the kicker: owning Greenland wouldn't just be about the stuff under the ice. It would be about projecting power, about controlling the Arctic, about staring down our rivals from a very chilly, very strategic vantage point. Let's be clear, the Arctic is not some empty frozen wasteland. It's a region of immense strategic importance, and it's rapidly becoming the epicenter of a new Cold War. Think of it as Game of Thrones, but with more ice and fewer dragons. and everyone wants a piece of the pie, or should I say, the iceberg. You've got Russia flexing its muscles, building military bases, and sending submarines on joyrides under the ice. They're like that neighbor who keeps building a bigger fence and peeking over it with binoculars. Not exactly subtle, are they? Then you've got China, our favorite economic frenemy, muscling its way in with its Polar Silk Road initiative. They're investing billions in infrastructure, research, and even icebreaker ships. Icebreakers, it's like they're planning a family vacation to the North Pole and inviting everyone along, but with ulterior motives, obviously. And let's not forget the smaller players, Canada, Norway, Denmark, all vying for control of this new frontier. It's a geopolitical free-for-all, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Now, you might be thinking, John, this all sounds very dramatic, but what can the US actually do about it? Well, for starters, we could try not shooting ourselves in the foot every 5 minutes with our foreign policy. That would be a good start. But beyond that, we need to get serious about the Arctic. We need to invest in research, infrastructure, and our military presence. We need to work with our allies and stand up to our rivals. We need to show the world that we're not just going to sit back and let the Arctic become another arena for great power competition. Because here's the thing, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. It affects global trade, climate change, and the balance of power for decades to come. So buckle up, buttercups, because things are about to get very, very interesting. Greenland. This icy behemoth, often overlooked on a map, is quickly becoming a pawn in a high-stakes geopolitical chess match. And as the ice melts and the Arctic opens up, the battle for Greenland will only intensify. Will the US find a way to assert its presence and secure its interest? Will China's economic influence win the day? Or will Greenland itself chart its own course, carving out a new future as an independent nation? One thing's for sure, the future of Greenland is anything but certain. It's a story that's still being written, and the ending is far from decided. What do you think? Should the US have bought Greenland? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.